Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with a deck creation video, this time with the infamous Cruelclaw. This is a list that I built for Sharok, who was looking for a specific thing. They said, the main focus I was thinking is cheating and dropping big creatures into play, but if possible, a spell slinger and punishing enchantments sub-theme / secondary strategy too, if possible. Overall combination of these, and just live up to the name Cruelclaw to be vicious and punishing cruel as possible. The power level I was thinking was around an 8 if possible. If need be, I can max my budget to $750. Well, Sharok, here's the deck I built. I got it around to $500. I like to be, if I can, a few hundred below such a big limit of $750. If I wanted to use the whole budget, which is, you know, if I ran a business or I worked for the government, I would try to maximize that budget. That way, you know, you could see how much it could be used. So if I wanted to do that, I think we'd be playing even more staples. We would probably be playing some more Tutors. We would be playing Dockside Extortionist, cards like that that are just like sheer power level cards. Especially Dockside would cut another $50 to $70. I'm not actually quite sure where it is at these days. Let's do a quick look. Dockside Extortionist goes for, yeah, about $80 to $100. So if I wanted to use that whole budget, I would put it in here. But I like to stay a little under, and I did a lot in this deck, and there's a lot I want to talk about. So let's get right into it and take a look at our commander and what I have built. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is the infamous Cruelclaw, and why are they our Weasel Commander card? Well, they are in red-black, 3 mana for a 3/3 menace, and they have one ability. When the infamous Cruelclaw deals combat damage to a player, exile the cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. This is a very, very straightforward ability, building a very straightforward deck. We are going to be cheating on costs, and we're going to build a deck that can take advantage of cheating on costs. So, going right into it, the first kind of hurdle I had with this deck, and I think the first thing you want to think about these kind of commanders or cards that either cascade or they pull cards off the top of your deck, is how many hits can we have, and how many setup, interaction, payoff cards can we have without diluting the hits. So for example, if we look at our creatures, you can see that starting pretty much half after the first like 6-7 cards, we're in the 4 mana and above section. And part of the reason I did that is almost, and I do believe all of these are just very, very good hits off of our commander. If you look at it this way, we have some setup or value creatures near the top, and then the payoff here. The other piles are somewhat similar. Sorceries mainly are setup and interaction near the top, and then coming into 5 mana and beyond, we have payoffs. With instants, we have it a little less. This is all setup and payoff. Sorry, setup and payoff. These are all setup cards or interaction cards and no payoff cards because we need interaction anyways. In artifacts, we have almost completely, you know, setup cards with 1 payoff, and in enchantments we go back to that kind of level where half of them or more than half of them are payoffs. I think looking at this, if you really wanted to, you can kind of mess with the numbers. For example, if you're going to say, well, Cursed, I'd really like to take out Faithless Looting, for example, which is one of the weaker hits of the deck, or Dark Ritual, and instead I want to put a few other haymakers. And I think I'd be generally okay with that. I don't think that's the biggest problem here. I think we can do that, but I wanted to keep the deck functioning. There's definitely a need to interact once we're trying to hit that power level 8. You know, as it's known, almost everyone thinks their deck as a power level 7. How do you break past that glass ceiling, let's say, is that you need reliable interaction, reliable game plans, and a presence in every game you're in. And so with that, I find it really hard to be cutting a lot of our lower mana cards because I do think they're very, very valuable. But I am no exception to the rules of how we look at decks, so let's take a look at the two things we always start with. Land count is 40 including MBFCs, but 36 otherwise. MBFCs have been very much so stronger since Modern Horizons 3. And when it comes to the two-color MDFCs, where is ours? Sorcery, right? Yes, Blood Soak Insight is definitely one of the strongest ones, and so it's the two-color one we have access to, which is really nice. Once again, this is this one we can't really cheat cards into play, but we can basically draw 3 from our opponent's deck for 1 turn, or 2 turns, sorry, which is really cool. Just a generally good card to be flipping off, and otherwise just a land. Likewise for the others, most of them are removal. Malakir Rebirth brings our creatures back, Fel the Profane destroys creatures, and Boggart Trawler exiles opponents' graveyards. It is a Bajuka Bog that is also a creature. The rest of our lands are mainly built around having honestly good utility and good colors, but I did make a very dedicated choice to grab as many of the fetch lands we can grab. Now, did I play ones that are out of color? I did. I always put these in myself, but if you are the kind of player that only wants to play the fetch lands within your colors, you can remove that. We also have, Fabled Passage, and I believe we're playing Prismatic, are we not? Perhaps it is more expensive than I thought, but Prismatic Vista could be played here as well. Why do I want as many fetches as possible? We'll get that to, in a second. I think it's kind of obvious, it's Blood Moon effects, but we'll get there in a second. I also want to take a moment to look at our curve. Our curve is what I would consider to be very straightforward when it comes to a cheating into play deck. We tend to kind of trail off quite a bit. Now 9 is Blasphemous Act, so that's not actually that. But before then, we have a lot of cards here that kind of are high mana, some of which can be reduced in other ways, but the accessibility of them is that they're all kind of plateauing there because we're going to cheat these cards into play. Looking at 3 mana where our commander is, it says here that we have a total of 12 3-mana spells, but we can see Boggart Trawler is a creature. We can see that Dismember as well is also a 1-mana card, so we're probably closer to 10 rather than 12. Yeah, so that's how I kind of justify having a lot of 3-drops, but the main thing here is we have very strong 3-drops, which is when, let's come back to Blood Moon. I really think if you are spending a few hundred, let's say $500 and more in a 2-color deck, you have access to fetch lands and red, I think you should heavily consider Blood Moon effects. I know to a certain extent they might be seen as too powerful in certain metas, but if the goal is to build a deck that competes at level 8 power, having cards in our deck that just let us shut down or slow down our opponents to a very high degree is just going to be essential. Something else that obviously goes along with that is a certain level of tutor. I try to keep the tutors low. Profane Tutor is really nice because it's kind of a delayed tutor, though it costs very little mana, so that's nice. Scheming Symmetry is very strong here because it allows us to set up for our attack with our commander, and we have a few Unmarked Grave or Entomb abilities, so that for our very big creatures, we can go, instead of just trying to cheat them into play through our commander, we can also reanimate them. So I'm just jumping around a little bit, but I really wanted to bring attention to what I think is a very valuable backup plan. And this is after I got past the main idea of like the kind of percentage of the deck I wanted to be active combo cards, I wanted an alternative win. If you remember what Shirok said, they were saying that they wanted a secondary plan. And they were thinking of, creatures mainly, and a secondary plan of punishing enchantments, for example. And something I think is really interesting about that, and partially why I went a little different, is that they are asking for different payoffs, not different ways to enable the deck. Now, I'm not too sure if they know the difference between those two ideas, but what's important here is that we are inundated with payoffs. We need more enablers and enablers that function in a way that our opponent's decks might not be able to fight in the same way as they would fight against Cruelclaw. What I mean quite literally about that is they're going to spend removal on Cruelclaw over and over, or they're going to have boards that you cannot menace your way through. And so we're going to need a plan that doesn't use the same things. And for me, Rowan, Scion of War, is exactly the direction I want to go in. Rowan here is very good at cheating out cards by reducing their mana cost by a tremendous amount. And the way this works is whereas Cruelclaw activates once per turn outside of like double strike effects or multiple combats, Rowan's effect will persist through any number of casts that turn. So black and red spells cost X less to cast, where X is the number or amount of life you lost this turn. So you will notice wherever I could, I would put in cards that would pay or use the ability to pay life. From little things here, such as Shadowgrange Archfiend, which pays 8 life, to much more direct things like Villas, like Dismember, like the fetch lands, like the Shocking off the fetch lands, and cards like that that enable us to just pay a little life here and there. Bolas' Citadel, of course, as well, and so on. Even I really wanted to play Descent into Avarice for a very similar thing. These cards can reliably deal damage, Keen Duelist as well, but these cards can reliably deal enough damage to us that we should be able to cheat out some of our higher mana costs at much reduced prices, right? I'm not saying it's going to be easy to get to like 6 life paid to get a 2 mana Archon of Cruelty, but I think you can average pretty easily 3 life paid, and now Combustible Gearhawk is 3 mana, or Harvester of Misery is 2 mana, and then whatever mana you have remaining, you can cast like Into the Fire, or you can cast Demand Answers for just a little cheaper, right? These reductions really do matter, and I find them to be very powerful here. The other bonus, to kind of loop these all together, because I started talking about the Blood Moon things, is by having Rowan being our main backup plan, there's a whole theme of 3 mana cards that win us the game, hence coming back here, because you might have noticed Dimir Machinations is in here, which is a transmute card, which is a 3 mana tutor card that you have to pay, discard this, and you search and reveal a card of the same mana cost. Dimir Machinations notably picks up some of the strongest cards in our deck. Whether you desperately need a land or exile with Boggart Trawler, whether you want either of your moon effects, whether you need Rowan to go ahead and, play the game alternative to Cruelclaw. I guess if Cruelclaw is in your deck, but you would probably just put it into your command zone. Dismember being removal, Fire Covenant being mass removal, both Necrodominance and Necropotence being here to pay even more life and draw cards. You can see that Dimir Machinations, despite being maybe not the strongest card you've ever seen, is just really powerful in this deck. So, everything else here, I'm not going to go through everything, wants to kind of fall into somewhere in between these kind of ideas. We have in our artifacts generally really good setup cards such as Top and Brainstorm to make sure our commander works out, Vorak Battlehorns that works with Menace to make your commander unblockable, Haste enablers, all of that's there. In enchantments, likewise, we have a bunch of like big hitters going into really strong cards of card draw, going into that kind of cursing and cruel side of Cruelclaw. Fiery Emancipation is incredibly accessible to triple all damage that you do, and we'll come back to Virtue in a second. Otherwise, actually, let's talk about Virtue now. Virtue is one of several cards, such as Dismember, such as what is the other one? Harvester of Misery, or Trumpeting Carnosaur, where these are cards that have very high mana abilities, but have either a very good discard or alternative casting cost, where we can still get a use out of them when we draw them and we don't have the mana to play them. I'm trying to think of anything else I really want to point out. I think there's a lot of... So the way you play this game, let's talk about this. The way you play this deck is set up for 1 to 2 really good Cruelclaw turns, right? The goal is ideally, if we can use our setup cards such as Brainstone or Sensei's Top or Scroll Rack, is that we can kind of edit what's on top of our deck to get the best cards out of it, but generally if we can drop any one of these more reasonable bombs, from Gear Hulk to Sire of Insanity, we're going to be tremendously changing the game to the point that we're going to get a very big advantage. While our opponents deal with that advantage, we should be working to the next cheating a card into play to lock the game down. So for example, if we were to have Sire of Insanity, following it up by Painful Quandary or Rite of the Raging Storm would pretty much lock the game down almost entirely for your opponents. Likewise, if we could get, Hoarding Broodlord out, which is just a very, very strong creature, that'll tutor our next card and be able for us to be able to get the next play down. So we could cheat out Hoarding Broodlord, tutor, Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon into our hand, though I think they're actually in exile, sorry. Tutor them into exile, maybe convoke or otherwise just immediately cast it, and now we have both a very big beater and we've locked maybe 2 to 3 of our opponents out of the game as they only have mountains. Generally, that's the things that kind of catch my eye on it. Like I said before, what would I change if I was a bit more tuned to be stronger would definitely be putting in more tutors, maybe considering fast mana, but know that we're approaching CDH at that point. Though I don't think this is the kind of deck that does well in CDH, so you'll never quite hit there. If I was thinking to power down the deck, I most likely would cut at the tutors. Profane Tutor, Scheming Symmetry, Entomb, and Unmarked Grave would be kind of where I'd start. Put in maybe more value cards, more mana rocks, things like that to support an alternative plan to cast these cards. Instead of reanimating them, you're just going to ramp to them. But I'd probably keep Dimir Machinations because I think it's genius. If you are going even further lower in power due to budget concerns, the fetches most likely can really easily come out, and a few of these hits are just what I would consider far too expensive, such as Sensei's Dividing Top is just too much money for what it does. Likewise, Scroll Rack. They are the things that make the deck work, but they come at a price. This is also a good time for me to point out there was a few things I did avoid. I avoided Eldrazi mainly. I'm pretty sure there is that kind of idea that whenever we're cheating cards out, Eldrazi are super, super attractive or very, very big artifacts because they're just very splashy and fun. There's 2 reasons I avoided them. The first one very directly is because I find that to be kind of boring. Though I do ramp into Eldrazi's in other decks, I try to do it thematically or because they're the only thing I can ramp into. For example, my Belby deck that I played on MTG Mudstas recently only generates colorless mana, and therefore ramping into Eldrazi or artifacts is the most accessible thing. The other reason outside of just being not what I was really interested in, is because Rowan continues to be our secondary win condition, or sorry, I should say secondary enabler, and her ability only triggers on black or red cards. So Eldrazi are basically completely useless to us, and therefore there is not a single colorless card above 2 mana. I momentarily have to look in case I'm lying, but yes. So that's kind of where I was going with that, and that was the main idea. Anything else I want to point out? I think there's a few neat things that I'd have to see if they worked out. I would be suspicious of Zoyoa. Zoyoa's really catching my eye because the number of fetch lands and the number of abilities that we have make descending very, very easy. And this ability I really, really do like as one, an early death touch creature that can get attacks in or can block certain things, but 2, this kind of pressure on your opponent to force a discard card, force them to discard a card each, sacrifice a permanent each, or 3 damage to each opponent, really does add up in a game like this. And when you're able to follow this up with a Blood Moon effect, a Painful Quandary effect, or a, Sire of Insanity effect, that creature will be on the board for quite a long time, and will be able to get you a lot of advantage turn after turn as long as you're descending. Which once again, I think with the amount of fetch lands and discard that you have access to, is going to be pretty easy to do. The other one is Anger. I really like Anger here. I would still be a little suspicious of it. Please give it a test and tell me if it's good. Maybe it's better than Mass Hysteria, but I have the feeling that Mass Hysteria is going to be better than it. The last thing I want to end on is that I hate this card. I cannot describe to you the pain that filled my heart when I had to put Sensei's Divining Top into a deck. I really don't like card manipulation effects, top deck manipulation, unless it's Lantern Control, let's say. But otherwise, I'm not particularly interested in this kind of very bluish effect of constantly changing the top cards of our deck. And especially, it's a thing that makes the game slower and slower. But for those who know and have played against Sensei's Divining Top, it is very, very slow. Is it divining or divining? I'm actually not too sure. But due to the way Cruelclaw works, I had to come and put it in. So I just wanted to point out that it is a very, very heavy heart that it's here in the first place. All right, that's generally my thoughts on this. I hope this deck is what you were looking for, Shirok. Please let me know which parts interest you or if anything doesn't really catch your fancy. It'll help me know for next time. There are some cards I didn't quite go over that really have caught my eye, such as Fel, but those will come up in other videos, let's say. All right, I've had quite a weekend, so I want to end the video here. Thank you so much for sending the deck. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.